Alright, buckle up everybody. It's going to be a bumpy ride. We're going to be getting into some height maps. So first thing, let's start off with the settings for the height map. If you go into your sand map file, you have the width, the length, the height, and the height map resolution. So the width and the length, those are game tiles. So we're going to do 256 by 256. The height is times 10 meters. So if this is 128, this map represents a maximum height difference between the lowest point in the map and the highest point of the map, which would be 1,280 meters, or 128 game units. For the height map resolution, this is the number of vertices, which is always going to be one more than the width or the height. So if I have 256, I'm going to have 257. So we're going to go ahead and save that. And then if we go to Photoshop, I've got my image here. If we go to image size, we're going to make this 257 by 257 pixels. And we're going ahead and we're going to save that as a raw. And for the image mode, it's going to be grayscale 16-bit. And I will get more into that in a little bit later. But first to kind of understand what a height map is and what it does, if we go into Blender here, I've got a plane that's divided up. So this is divided up into 4 tiles by 4 tiles for 16 tiles total. So imagine each one of these tiles is one game unit. So just like we had 256 game units for our width and our length, we would have 256 tiles instead of 4. But basically what a height map does is you're altering the height of each vertice, and each color in an image represents the vertical height ranging from 0 black to 1 white, or the lowest height to the max height. And each pixel represents how far up and down each one of these vertices will go. Now the reason you have a height map resolution of 1 plus whatever your game units are is because that's the number of vertices. That's the actual number of pixels your image is going to have. And you're always going to have one more set of vertices for every game tile. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 game tiles. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 vertices. And if I try and create one more game tile, now instead of 4 I have 5 game tiles. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 vertices. So that's how that works. So if we come back into Photoshop, to explain the difference between 8-bit and 16-bit, 16-bit means there's smaller steps between values. So with 8-bit, you've got 256 values for each channel. And since this is grayscale, it's just one single channel. So 16 bits per channel, you've got a whole lot more, like 16,000 or something like that compared to the 256. Now the trick is finding software that works in 16-bit. Photoshop's what I use for working in 16-bit. I've heard of plugins for GIMP. There is a website called Photopea where you can upload a file and convert to 16-bit. So if you're working in an 8-bit software, which you can do, the only thing is if you're working in 8-bit, your height map height is going to have to be a very low number. The lower the number, the better. And honestly, you can totally get away with probably 16 here. That'd be 160 meters total height difference in your map. You can do quite a bit with that, especially on smaller maps. Go to the Discord Mappers Resources. I've got all the information here on height maps. And as you can see, under the sample calculations for the same map height value, if you have it set for 32, your max height is going to be 320 meters. And for each RGB value, it's going to be 1.25 meters. and that would probably be small enough that you would not get stair stepping. And what stair stepping is if we take these vertices, we move them up. So here we've got a smooth kind of slope, right? Stair stepping is going to be, you're going to have large values between what you can choose. So you're going to get very choppy looking geometry. But if you compact that down to a very small max height, you can actually get away with that and you won't be able to visualize the stair stepping. I don't know if Photopea does it. Might want to check out photopea.com if they've got a blur in here for filters, which they do. So if you were to work in 8-bit and then convert it to 16-bit, after you convert it to 16-bit, if you applied just a very, very, very light blur, it will smooth out that stair stepping and you'll end up with a lot better end result if you're working in 8-bit. If we start out with a gray in the middle, that allows you to go darker values to create valleys and then higher values to create elevated terrain. So just to show you here, I've got this set to 128 and this is 256 game tiles by 256 game tiles. And at 10 meters per game unit, that's going to be 2.5 kilometers, roughly. So if I do 5 pixels, that's going to be 50 meters. So that right there is a 50 meter circle. There's a white value. There's a black value. If I go ahead and save this. So as you can see, that is the max height. As you can see, that's a factory. So this is a very small map. This would be technically kind of about it would have the same feel as about a 5-kilometer map in Supreme Commander. But as you can see, the black goes way, way down and the white goes pretty high. So for this kind of height difference, you definitely need 16-bit. If I go to and I change this to 16 for a total height difference of 160 meters. I do have to reload the editor. If you save your height map file in your image editor, it'll update automatically. Most of anything else, if you change, you need to actually close down the editor and reopen the file. If you try to reopen the file, it's not going to open properly. So as you can see, you have a lot different height difference here for the maximum. And this would be totally usable for a very small map because not only can you go up that much, but you can go down that far too. So if you start off with black and you only work up, you could actually have multi-level plateaus. If you're going to have a map with water, that's when I suggest starting with a gray middle value. If you're going to have land, you got to kind of figure out where your base value is for your main play area of your map. If you're just going to have small, shallow trenches, you would start off with a lower value, so you'd have higher values to work with later on for doing your various plateaus and stuff. That's very important. It's very important to early on establish where you want your min and max heights. So what I recommend is what I do. Let's say this is a map with water. I'm going to start with black and I'll have a pretty big brush, probably 15 pixels. There we go. What I recommend is creating a new layer and painting on that. So the black is going to be the bottom of my water. I'm just going to do some random stuff. And now I can copy, paste that. And now if I select that layer, if I select these two layers, transform them, I can rotate them around 180 degrees. And then I can set this to darken. And now I will have a symmetrical map. So I know those are going to be my water areas. The gray is going to be my land. Now I got to decide like where do I want like cliffs. So now I'm going to go with a smaller brush, maybe 5. And I know white was a bit much, so I'm going to go just a little bit lighter than that. And create some kind of plateau peaks here, whatever. I forgot to create a new layer. So just kind of create like a maze, I guess. And you're just going to have to kind of go back and forth. And so this gives me a rough idea of height. Uh, so it looks good. I'm satisfied with that height. That's going to be one level of plateau. And might create some higher ones over here. Make this all symmetrical. And so now I've got my symmetrical map. Now I'm going to save this. And for the height map format, it's always going to be raw. And that's why you have to have you'd have to use Photopea or something like that to convert to raw if you don't have software that will be able to save as a raw format. So now we've got these high peaks. So this is a good way of roughing out the heights for your map. You can decide how high you want peaks, where you want those peaks to be that high, stuff like that. And I highly recommend starting out like this. And then what you can do is later on, you can just go through and if you're using image software, use different brushes for different effects. You can, so like if I do filter blur, I'll do a Gaussian blur, but a very small one. And now I've got smoothed out. I can get into a lot with using Photoshop, using different layer effects to get like different cliffs and different types of cliffs, mountains and stuff. But right now this video is just really not so much about creating height maps as it is just trying to show y'all how to work with them. I know the 16-bit gets a lot of people, so does the raw format. Just play around, see what you can do. The other thing is, in your photo editing software, if you're working in 16-bit, it is possible your values can get out of range. So out of what your monitor or what your eyes can actually see. Um, what I do in Photoshop is I'll create a levels layer, and using levels I can compress that down to a visual range. So if I'm working on a certain height range, I can adjust my levels temporarily so I can visualize what I'm doing. It can be very difficult. This is why people use terrain editing software like World Machine, World Creator, etc. Not just for, doing erosion effects and stuff, but it's just that software is nice for working with images, but yet having a visual way of seeing all the range of values in 3D. But like I was saying, this is using a height of 16, so I could probably convert this to 8-bit now. It does have to be 16-bit, but I'm just going to save it as 8-bit so that I lose all the 16-bit information. And now I'm going to convert back to 16-bit and resave it. And we'll see if we get any stair stepping. So as you see, there's that should work fine. So you can definitely create maps out of 8-bit editing software. Just be sure and convert it to 16-bit. And if you start getting stair stepping and bad geometry, just convert it to 16-bit and then run a very small, not a Gaussian blur, like just this regular blur is what you would want to use. You just want a very, very small blur just to help blur those values. And if you're working directly in 16-bit, for example, if you're working in Photoshop, what I do to get different values is, so when you're doing your concept map, before I did that blur, things were very choppy, but this helps me get exact, precise heights that I want to get. And I recommend saving those in swatch books. Now, you're going to be limited in editing, photo editing software. When you enter a value, you have to enter RGB values or percentages. So like even 1%, you can't do tenths or hundredths or thousandths of a percent, which is what you need. If you're in 16-bit and you want a value in between two values, paint those two values somewhere. I create a separate file just for doing this. But paint those two areas and then do a blend or a blur or something, and then you can take the eyedropper and you can start sampling the values in between so that it can be time consuming, but it's how you can really finely tune and tweak your heights for your map, instead of having to do large value differences. Um, Sometimes it can really make a difference. Sometimes you won't really notice a difference at all. So that's what I got for height maps, guys. Got any questions? Let me know.